I've no use for owls, said Gaunt. I don't open letters. Then you can hardly complain that you get no warning of visitors, said Ogden tartly. I am here following a serious breach of wizarding law, which occurred here in the early hours of this morning. All right, all right, all right, bellowed Gaunt. Come in the bleeding house, then, and much good it'll do you. The house seemed to contain 3 tiny rooms. 2 doors led off the main room, which served as kitchen and living room combined. Morphin was sitting in a filthy armchair beside the smoking fire, twisting a live adder between his thick fingers and crooning softly at it in Parcel tongue. Hissy, hissy, little snaky. Slither on the floor. You be good to Morphin, or he'll nail you to the door. There was a scuffling noise in the corner beside the open window, and Harry realized that there was somebody else in the room, a girl whose ragged grey dress was the exact color of the dirty stone wall behind her. She was standing beside a steaming pot on a grimy black stove, and was fiddling around with the shelf of squalid-looking pots and pans above it. Her hair was lank and dull, and she had a plain, pale, rather heavy face. Her eyes, like her brother's, stared in opposite directions. She looked a little cleaner than the 2 men, but Harry thought he had never seen a more defeated-looking person. Daughter, Merope, said Gaunt grudgingly, as Ogden looked inquiringly toward her. Good morning, said Ogden. She did not answer, but with a frightened glance at her father turned her back on the room and continued shifting the pots on the shelf behind her. Well, Mr. Gaunt, said Ogden, to get straight to the point, we have reason to believe that your son, Morphin, performed magic in front of a muggle late last night. There was a deafening clang. Merope had dropped one of the pots. Pick it up, Gaunt bellowed at her. That's it, grub on the floor like some filthy muggle. What's your wand for, you useless sack of muck? Mr. Gaunt, please, said Ogden in a shocked voice, as Merope, who had already picked up the pot, flushed blotchily scarlet, lost her grip on the pot again, drew her wand shakily from her pocket, pointed it at the pot, and muttered a hasty, inaudible spell that caused the pot to shoot across the floor, away from her, hit the opposite wall, and crack in 2. Morphin let out a mad cackle of laughter. Gaunt screamed, Mend it, you pointless lump, mend it. Merope stumbled across the room, but before she had time to raise her wand, Ogden had lifted his own and said firmly, Reparo. The pot mended itself instantly. Gaunt looked for a moment as though he was going to shout at Ogden, but seemed to think better of it. Instead, he jeered at his daughter, Lucky the nice man from the ministry's here, isn't it? Perhaps he'll take you off my hands, perhaps he doesn't mind dirty squibs. Without looking at anybody or thanking Ogden, Merope picked up the pot and returned it, hands trembling, to its shelf. She then stood quite still, her back against the wall between the filthy window and the stove, as though she wished for nothing more than to sink into the stone and vanish. Mr. Gaunt, Ogden began again, as I've said, the reason for my visit. I heard you the first time, snapped Gaunt. And so what? Morphin gave a muggle a bit of what was coming to him. What about it, then? Morphin has broken wizarding law, said Ogden sternly. Morphin has broken wizarding law. Gaunt imitated Ogden's voice, making it pompous and sing-song. Morphin cackled again. He taught a filthy muggle a lesson. That's illegal now, is it? Yes, said Ogden. I'm afraid it is. He pulled from an inside pocket a small scroll of parchment and unrolled it. What's that, then, his sentence? Said Gaunt, his voice rising angrily. It is a summons to the ministry for a hearing. Summons. Summons. Who do you think you are, summoning my son? Anywhere. I'm head of the Magical Law Enforcement Squad, said Ogden. And you think we're scum, do you? Screamed Gaunt, advancing on Ogden now, with a dirty yellow-nailed finger pointing at his chest. Scum. Who'll come running when the ministry tells them to? Do you know who you're talking to, you filthy little mudblood, do you? I was under the impression that I was speaking to Mr. Gaunt, said Ogden, looking wary, but standing his ground. That's right, roared Gaunt. For a moment, Harry thought Gaunt was making an obscene hand gesture, but then realized that he was showing Ogden the ugly, black stoned ring he was wearing on his middle finger, waving it before Ogden's eyes. See this? See this? Know what it is? No. Where it came from? Centuries it's been in our family, that's how far back we go, and pure blood all the way. Know how much I've been offered for this? With the Peveril coat of arms engraved on the stone. I've really no idea, said Ogden, blinking as the ring sailed within an inch of his nose, and it's quite beside the point, Mr. Gaunt. Your son has committed. With a howl of rage, Gaunt ran toward his daughter. For a split second, Harry thought he was going to throttle her as his hand flew to her throat. Next moment, he was dragging her toward Ogden by a gold chain around her neck. See this? He bellowed at Ogden, shaking a heavy gold locket at him, while Merup spluttered and gasped for breath. I see it, said Ogden hastily. Slytherins, yelled Gaunt. Sorlaser Slytherins. We're his last living descendants. What do you say to that, eh? Mr. Gaunt, your daughter, said Ogden in alarm, but Gaunt had already released Merup. She staggered away from him, back to her corner, massaging her neck and gulping for air. So, said Gaunt triumphantly, as though he had just proved a complicated point beyond all possible dispute. Don't you go talking to us as if we're dirt on your shoes. Generations of pure bloods, wizards all, more than you can say, I don't doubt. And he spat on the floor at Ogden's feet. Morphin cackled again. Merup, huddled beside the window, her head bowed and her face hidden by her lank hair, said nothing. Mr. Gaunt, said Ogden doggedly, I am afraid that neither your ancestors nor mine have anything to do with the matter in hand. I am here because of Morphin and the muggle he accosted late last night. Our information, he glanced down at his scroll of parchment, is that Morphin performed a jinx or hex on the said muggle, causing him to erupt in highly painful hives. Morphin giggled. Be quiet, boy, snarled Gaunt in Parcel tongue, and Morphin fell silent again. And so what if he did, then? Gaunt said defiantly to Ogden, I expect you've wiped the muggle's filthy face clean for him, and his memory to boot. That's hardly the point, is it, Mr. Gaunt? Said Ogden. This was an unprovoked attack on a defenseless. "Ah, I had you marked out as a Muggle lover the moment I saw you," sneered Gaunt, and he spat on the floor again. "This discussion is getting us nowhere," said Ogden firmly. "It is clear from your son's attitude that he feels no remorse for his actions." He glanced down at his scroll of parchment again. "Morfin will attend a hearing on the 14th of September to answer the charges of using magic in front of a Muggle and causing harm and distress to that same Mug." Ogden broke off. The jingling, clopping sounds of horses and loud, laughing voices were drifting in through the open window. Apparently the winding lane to the village passed very close to the copse where the house stood. Gaunt froze, listening, his eyes wide. Morfin hissed and turned his face toward the sounds, his expression hungry. Mara raised her head. Her face, Harry saw, was starkly white. "My God, what an eyesore!" rang out a girl's voice, as clearly audible through the open window as if she had stood in the room beside them. "Couldn't your father have that hovel cleared away, Tom?" "It's not ours," said a young man's voice. "Everything on the other side of the valley belongs to us, but that cottage belongs to an old tramp called Gaunt, and his children. The son's quite mad. You should hear some of the stories they tell in the village." The girl laughed. The jingling, clopping noises were growing louder and louder. Morfin made to get out of his armchair. "Keep your seat," said his father warningly, in Parseltongue. "Tom," said the girl's voice again, now so close they were clearly right beside the house. "I might be wrong, but has somebody nailed a snake to that door?" "Good Lord, you're right," said the man's voice. "That'll be the son, I told you he's not right in the head." "Don't look at it, Cecilia, darling." The jingling and clopping sounds were now growing faint again. "Darling," whispered Morfin in Parseltongue, looking at his sister. "Darling," he called her. "So he wouldn't have you anyway." Mara was so white Harry felt sure she was going to faint. "What's that?" said Gaunt sharply, also in Parseltongue, looking from his son to his daughter. "What did you say, Morfin?" "She likes looking at that Muggle," said Morfin, a vicious expression on his face as he stared at his sister, who now looked terrified. "Always in the garden when he passes, peering through the hedge at him, isn't she? And last night—" Mara shook her head jerkily, imploringly, but Morfin went on ruthlessly, hanging out of the window waiting for him to ride home, wasn't she? "Hanging out of the window to look at a Muggle," said Gaunt quietly. All three of the Gaunts seemed to have forgotten Ogden, who was looking both bewildered and irritated at this renewed outbreak of incomprehensible hissing and rasping. "Is it true?" said Gaunt in a deadly voice, advancing a step or two toward the terrified girl. "My daughter, pure-blooded descendant of Salazar Slytherin, hankering after a filthy, dirt-veined Muggle." Mara shook her head frantically, pressing herself into the wall, apparently unable to speak.